Hello, everyone. This is MGT 201. My name is Dave Cliff. I am with the incident management team within AWS, and here to share a little bit more about a new product that we have coming, in addition to a lot of exciting talk about uptime, one of my favorite subjects. A little bit later on, I'll introduce you to my colleague Oren Nachman as well. Oren is also involved in incident management at AWS, in addition to being on the call leader rotation, which is the team that helps to run our major incident response. But if you are here today, you are interested in uptime, whether that's your applications, your infrastructure, your platform, whatever it is that you're hosting, you care about uptime. And we care about your uptime, in fact, and we want to help you to improve your uptime in whatever way we can. And the best way that we can do that is to help you prepare for downtime. Because let's be honest, failure happens. That's just the way it works. You can't achieve that mystical 100% uptime, and unfortunately, there's not that much that we can do about it. But we can help you to prepare. And so that's really what we're going to focus on in this session. So we're excited to have you along for the ride. Now, one of the first times where you might think about your uptime is actually when you're launching a new version of your product, or maybe it's an entirely new platform that you're rolling out. And you're thinking about your launch. And I love this quote from Hulu. Rafael Sultanovic, he's the VP of software development there, and he talks about preparing from an operational standpoint, and preparing for their launch in May, which thankfully went very smoothly. But the thing that makes me laugh about this quote in particular is what Rafael says right before this. He says, I don't know if we were lucky or prepared, probably a bit of both. And to be honest, that's the way it goes with incidents, because you just can't predict when an incident is going to occur. Failure is an inevitability when it comes to production systems. And so we want to help you to prepare for failure in your production systems and ensure that your applications can be resilient to that. So in light of that, we are going to talk about incidents a whole lot today. In fact, we're going to spend some time introducing you to some new capabilities called Incident Manager, part of AWS Systems Manager. And we're going to look at two kind of workflows that are relevant for this idea of operating more effectively and responding faster to incidents. We're going to talk through preparation, and we're going to look at learning from incidents, how you can effectively take some of the principles that we use internally, and we're going to share some of those principles with you in terms of the tools and the different processes that we've put in place, or mechanisms, as we'll go through. But before we get through all of that, I want to take you behind the scenes a little bit and into the mindset of us at AWS and how we think about uptime. And the place to start is really this idea that we all want to be better. We all want 100% uptime. We all, even in the cases of failures, this is one of the most common things we hear from teams after an incident that they've reviewed. They want to get better. They want to improve. They want to make sure that this incident never happens again. And unfortunately, good intentions aren't enough to get them there. Similarly, what Jeff Bezos has taught us is very much that good mechanisms are the way to actually get beyond just good intentions. You really have to focus in on what is the problem that we're solving, introducing tooling for that problem, and then introducing process around that to drive adoption, and ultimately to inspect those mechanisms that you put in place so that teams can improve over time. Because again, we all want to maintain 100% uptime, but the reality is that failure is going to occur. And so how you respond to failure is really one of the key elements that we need to look at. So drilling into this idea of an uptime flywheel, we look at shorter incidents in the middle, And we wrap kind of the incident life cycle around that, because that's kind of a continuous life cycle of improvement. You detect an issue, you respond to it. Hopefully you learn something about how you responded and what that failure looked like. And you improve the system and the response in any number of ways. You could make the system more resilient, or you can be more effective in how you respond, how you track different aspects of the incident life cycle. But what we found within AWS is that while those elements are incredibly important, there's a couple of key parts that can be added to this flywheel in order to really kind of push it forward. And that's helping you to drive individual team preparation for incidents. That means that if your dependency falls over in the middle of the night and your application is down as a result, it means that you're not necessarily just off the hook, because you have a promise to your customers to maintain uptime, to ensure availability of your application for their purposes. They don't care that your dependency happens to be down in that moment. And so this is where the idea of decentralizing the ownership and really pushing that down to individual teams, decoupling and empowering those teams to be effective, to respond more effectively to incidents themselves, including failure scenarios where their known dependency is maybe impaired in some way. So this is the flywheel that we're going to focus on, because we really want to look at how can we improve response through better preparation and learning from incidents. With that, I'm excited to be able to introduce the new capabilities within AWS Systems Manager called Incident Manager. An Incident Manager is made up of two major components. The first is something we call response plans. We want to help you to automate your response more effectively. We want you to think ahead of time, hey, we've instrumented for this particular alarm at this threshold, but what do we do when that alarm actually fires? Who do we contact? What runbooks should they think about following, whether that's for troubleshooting or for actual remediation? And where do we collaborate with other individuals through that experience? Those are the key parts to define as part of response plans. The second part is an incident dashboard, where we'll go in and track individual actions that are being taken, whether that's runbooks being executed or particular steps that are followed in a given runbook, tracking key metrics that are associated to customer impact are another area that we can track for you as part of that incident dashboard. And wrapping that together such that you have a really rich post-incident analysis experience and that can leverage the timeline that you've already tracked through the incident lifecycle. All of these are core parts to Incident Manager, because it's unclear when you're going to have your next incident. I mean, it could be like right now. Oh boy, I'm getting paged. Sorry, I got to take this. I'll be back in a second.
Oh, hey Dave, thank you so much for joining. Really sorry to interrupt you there in the middle of your summit recording. I know that's super important, but unfortunately we have an order drop. Really needed to pull you in on this one.
Oh, that's all right. I got the page, Oren. What's going on? I even put on my Resolver hat.
Yeah. So did I. Well, I'm on call. So it's been a little bit unclear. I've been taking a look at the metrics, and it looks like we have a bunch of problems on our Lambda side. Basically, we're seeing a 10% drop in orders. I'm worrying that it might actually start becoming a little worse. I've seen it jump around a little bit, so kind of go back to normalize, but then also drop immediately again. So I don't think this is like a one-off problem.
Yeah, I haven't lost all orders, obviously. So the lambdas are partially executing normally. Can you take me through what you've ready?
Yeah. So I started looking at the metrics. Just give them a second here to load so that we can run through. So you see, if we take a look at the order volume, you can see here that there's this drop, but then it does go back up. But again, I'm seeing like multiple drops here. Very recently. Kind of worried that that's it's not going to stabilize.
It's interesting. Yeah, there's a spike there too. So I wonder if can you add the Lambda metrics onto this? Want to take a look at concurrent executions.
Oh, that's absolutely, yes. That's a great. Sorry, I should have actually done that already. Let me just grab those from our dashboard. Actually, and in this case, I'm going to add in the request count as well. Might be a useful one to just have kind of front and center. Yes,
Oh, yeah.
there's that spike in requests.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, these Lambda
Okay,
metrics
so
don't look too healthy.
Yeah. All right. It looks like concurrent executions. Maybe we're capping out. What did the runbook tell you? Because I don't know if I might have. I can't remember if I added that to the runbook or not.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I did look at that, but I mean I followed kind of the diagnose steps that we have in here. So I took a look at CloudWatch. That's actually how I got to the Lambda bits and pieces. But then it looks like on our mitigation steps, we're primarily EC2 and Dynamo, but we do have this Lambda one actually. Wow, this is a new step that I hadn't noticed. Let me go and do that right now.
Yeah, this could be related to the reserved concurrency actually. So I wonder if we have a runaway Lambda in our account that may be taking up all of our concurrency limit.
Let me go check. We did just enable those cleaner Lambdas, but they were supposed to run with very low limits. Let me just take a look here. Yes, absolutely. Wow, they are consuming everything in the account, and we still have the default limit of 1,000. Okay, so let's do this.
Okay.
I'm gonna roll back. I'm actually gonna completely disable the cleanup Lambdas. I think that the impact of that is pretty low if I do that at least temporarily, and then we'll take it from there at least just to see if we can get some recovery. So let me just take care of that.
Actually, I can do that. If you want to make a note in the incident right now, that would be great.
Yeah.
So go over to the timeline and add an event in the timeline for this, and I'll take care of it.
Okay, let's do that.
Okay.
Lambda disabling. Okay.
You haven't had to page anyone else for this, right?
No, so it hasn't. So it escalated
could
to
escalate
me.
To the platform to you.
No, so it escalated to me, and then I didn't have to engage them. I did chat to the commander team. The commander team said that it was definitely not them because they double checked, and then I also rang up the Opera House team. Unfortunately, they also said it wasn't them, and that's why I started digging even deeper. And it's always nice to be able to say it's some other team, but yeah. Then I engaged you directly. It hasn't escalated further because we're still only 23 minutes in. I think if we're taking care of it now, we should be fine.
Yeah, I've implemented that change. Can you flip back to metrics and we'll see if we can watch the recovery? Hopefully that'll actually reduce the error rates here.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, we're seeing that kind of dropping, and I'm seeing a drop here on the Lambda side as well. It's obviously going to take a little bit of time to stabilize, but should be pretty quick. Brilliant. I'm gonna if you're okay with that, I'm gonna move to the kind of the prevention stage here, and I will continue to monitor this in parallel. I am gonna update the overview as well because I think that'll be really, really important for the analysis later on, just to make sure that we remember all these bits and pieces because this is a really interesting one. Really want to make sure this doesn't happen again.
Yeah, for the post-incident analysis, I'm going to have to pull you into this one, and we can spend time on it a little bit later if that works.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the timeline here looks pretty complete to me. I think we've got a nice view of the incident, and then the metrics. I'll continue to monitor the metrics, but I think we can go back to the summit at this point.
All right, crisis averted.
Wow.
Thanks, Oren. Great work.
Thank you so much, Dave. Thank you.
Whew. Wow. Okay, that was a tough one. But now that you've seen what it's like to manage an incident using Incident Manager, let's step back a little bit and talk about preparing for incident response. So one of the mechanisms that we use is our operational readiness review. And we split this into a number of different mechanisms, some sub-mechanisms, if you may. One of them is the annual readiness review, which includes an overview of what the service is like, what the operational health of that service is like. And this is done by different services, different cadences. So we will always do it just before launch, and we'll also do it semi-annually or sometimes annually, depending on the service. And we're going to run through everything from architecture to alarms to runbooks and just your operational cleanliness and health end to end. We're also going to do things like run a game day where we will get a team get a team into a room and run through scenarios. And we don't just run through scenarios on like a whiteboard. We actually get a dev, we'll take a dev and we'll designate them as the game master, and they'll spend a week just preparing scenarios, for example, using things like AWS Fault Injection Simulator, and they will inject faults into the system that can then be used to test your runbooks. Now, of course, we try to avoid doing this in production, although there are some services that just due to their size, we have to do testing in production. Well, not testing, sorry, we do game days in production. And it's a really great mechanism to get your resolvers into the right headspace without them having to worry about actual customer impact. It's also a really great mechanism for ramping up some of your newer team members who have not yet been on call, or they might have been on call, but they might not have experienced a large-scale incident. We also do a bunch of, the goal here is identifying risks. We're not here to gatekeep. We're not here to say, oh, you must go do this just because, you know, I've decided that you must go do this. We're not here to call out any services for not doing things correctly. We'll often bring in reviewers from other services to come help with these reviews, partially so that you get an external person, that external view, but also to make sure that you yourself are remaining impartial. In addition to that, a more frequent mechanism that we employ is the weekly ops metrics review. And this is something that is done at all levels internally at Amazon. So everything starting from your line teams that own the very basic services and all the way up to your larger organizations with hundreds of people and all the way up to AWS or Amazon.com size where you have thousands of people that are reviewing this on a weekly cadence. And it is a brilliant time to bring you together your whole org, again, regardless of size, to go share and celebrate some of those operational wins that have happened over the last week. And these can be anything from, hey, I just optimized some JVM memory metrics and found some incredible wins, or hey, we've improved our architecture. And there are things that other people can look at, celebrate, and then learn from. We then will review any operational events that have happened over the past week. So we call this the COE process, which we will talk about a little bit later on in this presentation, where we are aiming to learn from problems that have happened previously. And again, this is a blameless kind of mechanism. So no one is standing up there going, this person did that and that person did that, but rather we had a service. This was what, and very factual. This was the issue. This was the root cause. This is how we're fixing it. And this is how we're going to prevent it from happening again. And if any of these patterns look applicable to you in your services, this is what you should also be doing or looking for or watching out. And then, of course, we review service metrics. So we have the famous AWS wheel, where we spin a wheel and randomly a service is selected once per week, and a delegate will come up and will run the whole meeting through the operational metrics for that service. And again, this is a blameless review. So they're not sitting up there going, why don't you have this? Or why haven't you done that? But rather we're asking in terms of learning. So services will ask other services and I'll say, hey, you've got this metric here that I've never seen before. Why are you tracking this? What is this giving you? Or why do you not have this? Or why your alarm threshold set like that? Or why are you alarming here on a percentage change versus an absolute change? And people will then learn from that. So for example, one of the biggest issues that we've often had with services is how do you alarm on 4xx issues, right? You don't want to alarm on every single 4xx because a 400 from a customer can often be someone typed in a wrong URL. So there are various different mechanisms that have come up actually through the metrics review often. So for example, alarming on percentage change or alarming on percentage customer change. So depending on how many customers are now impacted by this new spike in 4xx's. And then again, this drives that org-wide improvements, which in the very next week is then sharing and celebrating wins, which often can sometimes be like, hey, we implemented something from the last week. And this ties really nicely back into the mechanism. So the tools that you have here are to build a healthy operating program. Your adoption, you're driving that adoption through the accountability, through the learning, through the reviews and reinforcement, and you're inspecting, again, through those reviews that are happening semi-annually and weekly. Now, how are we going to do this in the context of Incident Manager and how that works within Amazon and now within the AWS public product that we've just launched? So the first thing you want to do is you always want to be planning for failure. You want to be able to know how you can detect the problems that you don't even know you've got yet, but you want to be able to detect that something is wrong. And so, for example, we could use CloudWatch, we can use EventBridge, we can use API, direct API integration into your code. And the way we term these is that we have this concept of response plans. And the idea is that everything feeds into a response plan, and a response plan then defines what is your next step using Incident Manager? How are you going to go off and manage that incident? And we provide you with that framework that allows you to define the response plan, hook up those CloudWatch alarms into it, and then respond. And the responses are, basically here to answer the basic questions of incident management. Who do I need to engage? Who do I involve? What do they need? What tools do they need? What processes do they need in order to be able to diagnose the problem and then actually go and mitigate that? And we integrate here with AWS Chatbot for Slack and Chime integration. We include escalation plans and contacts so that you can actually get in touch with folks via direct messaging to their phones. And we provide integration with Systems Manager automation documents as runbooks, which then allow you to define both manual as well as automated steps for mitigation and investigation. And then as a last step, we have that actual mitigation that I was talking about, where we actually go in and we mitigate the problem. And then we also learn from that, because the whole point is that you don't want to continue to have these same incidents, but rather you want to learn from those incidents. And for that, we have a feature called Analysis, where we allow you to break down what happened in an incident, how did we take care of it, and what are the next steps to prevent it from happening next. And why don't we go now and we'll see a quick demo about what it looks like to configure a response plan within Incident Manager.
So we've just spoken a bunch about response plans. Now let's see what it's actually like to configure them within Incident Manager itself. The first thing we're going to do is define a name for this response plan. And this name will show up in a number of different places around the console, for example, within CloudWatch Alarm Actions. Next, we're going to define what the incident that gets created with the response plan actually looks like. So it's kind of a template. So the first thing we're going to do is set a default title. In this case, it's Banana Stand Critical Auto Drop Detected. I'm going to select a default impact from this list. In this case, I'm going to select high. And then I am going to provide a summary, even though it's optional, because I find that a summary can be very useful during an incident, provide some basic information about the incident, and then also provide some placeholder text that resolvers can quickly edit in order to update status without having to worry too much about formatting. Next, I'm going to define a dedupe string. So if a dedupe string is not defined, that means that every time a incident is invoked with this response plan, a brand new incident will be created. But if you do provide a dedupe string, it means that if an open incident already exists, it will be deduplicated into that one. In this case, I definitely don't want multiple copies. Sometimes that is desirable. In this case, it is not. So I am going to provide a dedupe string. And in this case, I'm going to set it to the name of the response plan. Next, I'm going to define where we communicate. So where are my responders going to have their live conversations? And I'm going to use AWS Chatbot in this case, and I'm going to choose a Slack channel called Order Processor. That will be automatically configured for me, pulling the configuration from Chatbot. But then I can also define which humans do I actually want to engage when this incident triggers. So in this case, I'm going to choose between an escalation plan or a contact. Generally don't engage individual people, so I'm going to choose an escalation plan. And then from there, I am going to go off and select a runbook. And the runbook in this case can be a mitigation runbook or a manual runbook that helps my resolvers walk through mitigation of an incident. So I already have one ready. I'm going to choose the auto drop one, and I'm going to select the default, and I'm going to create a brand new IAM role for this specifically. So in this case, it'll be the Banana Stand. And that's creation of a response plan.
All right, let's talk about learning from incidents, that analysis part that we were talking about before. So the mechanism that we use internally, we call it correction of errors. And externally, within Incident Manager, we call that the analysis. And the process here is blameless. So you're noticing a trend here. Everything here is blameless, because the idea here is that the fault does not lie with the poor resolver or the poor person who happened to check something in, but rather the blame here lies with the service or with the team as a whole, and we own that and we're driving that forward. And so the COE helps us learn from those mistakes, resolve the root cause, and then drive that continuous improvement so that we face those situations way less often than what we might have had without learning from these incidents. We focus here on the COE on everything, on all kind of areas of focus. In fact, it doesn't even have to be technical. Sometimes the COE will be about a process failure versus a actual technical failure, but very often we'll focus on the technical, we'll focus on the process that we used within our incident management process to go and root cause and mitigate that impact to our customers. We will look at documentation. Do we have the right runbooks? Was the runbook appropriately documented? And then we'll look at everything else that's ancillary. Did we have the right metrics? Did we have the right people that were engaged? What was the timeline like? Were we slow? Were we fast? Etc. And again, blameless. So none of these areas, as we kind of expand them out, will have names in them. Rather, we will use synonyms. So, for example, the team manager did this, the on-call did this, the secondary did that. And again, the key to a successful COE is being open and transparent. You can only do that if you're blameless, because you don't want people to feel the blame. And you can only learn from it if you're open and transparent about what's happened, because then that allows you to go and say, I have a COE, I have an analysis, I'm going to send that to my whole organization so that everyone here can learn from it. So let's go see what this looks like within Incident Manager.
Hey, Dave, thanks a lot for joining for this post-incident analysis for that order drop that we had the other week that you joined in on.
Oh, yes. Okay. I think I remember this one. This is one that I'd actually like to review in Weekly Ops Metrics if we can.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've put in a summary here that it should be a good overview of kind of what happened at a high level. I've also included those wins that you were mentioning so that we're also focusing on some of the good things that happened and not just on what needs to be improved for next time.
Yeah, I thought we ran that pretty well, and thankfully we're able to keep the customer impact to a minimum.
Yeah.
Just jog my memory. Can we take a look at the metrics for this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So I added in the two primary metrics here that we were looking at, so the order volume and the Lambda concurrent executions. And I also added in some annotations to indicate the start and end, as well as a short summary, just for the folks who are not going to be in the in-person review, so they can understand what they're actually looking at.
Oh, this is great. So they were brought forward from the incident, and then you were able to just annotate the graphs. That's amazing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. This makes a lot of sense. Fantastic. All right. Take me through the questions.
Yeah, so absolutely. So our detection was pretty good. I will fill out these other 4 questions ahead of the meeting. But I think some of the focus you were mentioning before is some around the mitigation kind of step. I filled out these questions kind of with the data from the timeline events, as well as just what actually happened. We do have one risk that was highlighted, and we'll probably have to dive into that a little bit more in the action items section.
Oh, great. So it recommended an action item to take. Okay, we'll look at that in a little bit. Yeah, and actually this would be a good one to capture some lessons learned just around Lambda concurrency. I wonder if there's anyone can take advantage of that in the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. So I tried to capture what you were recommending at the end of the incident last time, and I do think that there are a bunch of other services within Banana Stand that could absolutely take advantage of this.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay. Great. Yeah. Take me through the actions that you think we need to take then.
So absolutely. So we have this automatic recommendation that came from just directly from Amazon based on the answers to our questions, which is some of the updates to the runbook. We did discuss a bunch of things during the incident where you were suggesting basically standard operating procedures, which should have actually just been codified in the runbook already. One of those ones I actually added a more specific action item here, specifically on Slack. Because as I mentioned, like we were coordinating there with those 2 other teams with Commander and Opera House, and having them within our Slack would have been really beneficial at the time.
Yeah, since Incident Manager integrates with Slack, we should take better advantage of that in the future. That makes sense.
Brilliant.
Okay.
Thank you so much,
Thanks
Dave.
for the review.
All right, thanks, Oren. Well, just to wrap up here, I wanted to walk you through a couple of key takeaways from this session. First is that we encourage you to pursue uptime by preparing yourself in whatever way that it takes for downtime. And that goes beyond just identifying individual alarms that you may want to respond to. Have a plan ahead of time for what that failure scenario looks like, or spend time in a game day testing out a particular failure scenario, whether that's typical DR failover or something more complex where you're injecting latency into a particular area of your application. Pursue uptime by having a plan for what those cases look like, and also put together a plan for more exploratory scenarios where you just need access to the right dashboards so you can do the exploratory debugging that you need to do, because you never know what type of incident's going to rear its ugly head. The second is use good mechanisms to learn and improve. And this one in particular, I can't understate the importance of, because this is an area where I see so many customers that and teams even within AWS rely a little bit too much on good intentions when they just need a good mechanism to review action items more regularly that they see. Maybe it's taking an operational readiness review more regularly than they've been actually doing it. Use those good mechanisms, and in the ideal case, if you think Incident Manager is right for you, give it a try. Have that be part of the mechanisms that you take forward for your team and maybe for your organization. Try it out in AWS Systems Manager. Well, thank you very much for the time. I just want to remind you that there are some really amazing learnings and trainings that you can jump onto, especially in this area of DevOps and ownership. So I would encourage you to take a look at those. And I'll leave you with a great picture of Oren and I in front of the real banana stand in Seattle, Washington. We definitely miss it, but we're looking forward to getting back there soon. All right, thank you very much, everyone. And just a reminder, please fill out a session survey and ensure that we get some feedback there as well. Cheers.